Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the November 12 work session of the Ann Arbor City Council. Today, we are going to be listening to and discussing some exciting presentations with respect to the Michigan Future Grant Opportunities and the Arbor South project. But before we get that party started, we have the oath of office. You know who you are. Go on up to the front.
I, John Malik.
I, John Malik.
I, Travis Radina.
I, Travis Radina.
I, Jen Iron.
I, Jen Iron.
I, Erica Briggs.
I, Erica Briggs.
You can all repeat together. Do solemnly swear or affirm.
Do solemnly swear or affirm.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States of America.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States of America.
The Constitution of the State of Michigan.
The Constitution of the State of Michigan.
And that I will faithfully discharge the duties.
And that I will faithfully discharge the duties.
Of the office of City Council Member.
Of the office of City Council Member.
For the City of Ann Arbor, Michigan.
For the City of Ann Arbor, Michigan.
According to the best of my ability.
According to the best of my ability.
Well, as promised, the party will start. No one better than Mr. Dohoney. Mr. Dohoney, you have the con.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Congratulations on those of you that were sworn in this evening. We have two items that we're going to discuss with you tonight. The first one is a presentation by Michigan Futures. There are two people here, Lou Glazer and Donna Lazinski. They're going to talk to us about a grant that we are in line to receive. Both of them will be presenting information to you, and you'll be able to question each person when they're finished to see if you have any questions. Seems like a great opportunity for the city, and then at the end of that, we will move on to the second item. So, Lou, Donna?
So hello, council members and mayor, and welcome new council member. I remember my first swearing in. It's a very exciting moment, so congratulations. So I'm going to start by saying I'm fortunate enough to know a number of you, and so in my current role, I am working with Michigan Future. Michigan Future is a nonpartisan, non-ideological think tank with a very bipartisan board that comes from across the state, including members of the Detroit Regional Chamber, Skillman Foundation, the treasurer of Kent County, etc. And the mission of Michigan Future, which was founded by Lou Glazer almost 3 decades ago, is rising income for all. And so the focus of Michigan Future is how do we create public policy that ensures that Michiganders are able to afford to be able to send their kids to good schools, drive on good roads, save something for retirement, and have secure and stable homes and futures. Now, Michigan Future is founded in rigorous data. That is what we do. We look at the data with a clear, cold eye and weigh it against public policy initiatives and say what works to raise the income for all. So I kind of want to start with where we are, and we're going to go through this a little bit quickly. A handout, a pre-read, was sent to you earlier. We don't have slides, we don't have data. You're going to see me flail around with my hands an awful lot, and after about 3 to 5 minutes, then we'll stop. Happy to answer any questions before we hand the presentation over to Lou. We're here tonight because out of this data, we came to the conclusion that in order to raise income for all, you need to create an economy that works for all. In Michigan, we're shrinking as a population. We're losing our young talent. Capital and businesses come to where talent is now, And the way to grow and raise our income is by attracting, keeping, and retaining, creating and retaining young talent here in Michigan. So where are we? Where we are right now is that 6 in 10 Michiganders, and Washtenaw County is not an outlier here, 6 in 10 Michiganders cannot afford to live a middle-class lifestyle. 6 in 10. What we know is that this decline in household income, so not unemployment measures, because we know some people just opt out of the employment market, right? And they're not counted in an unemployment measure. In household income, we went from being one of the most prosperous states in the nation to now we are 39th in the nation. What that means is when we are comparing ourselves with other states, that can range from $8,000 to $11,000 sitting on the kitchen table for a family to achieve a middle-class lifestyle. So if we were to look now at Metro Detroit area compared to Chicago, our area is 6% below the nation. Chicago is 11% above. And so what we need to look at is how do we move our household income up? What we know is that as folks are choosing where they are going to create and raise their families, where they are going to put down their roots, young people want to put them down in high amenity, walkable, high public amenity, walkable, dense urban areas. Ann Arbor is one of the growth engines in our state, has one of the biggest growth potentials in the state if Ann Arbor chooses to take advantage of that. And so what we have advocated for is for placemaking to be the economic development priority for the state of Michigan. Because what we know is that once talent settles, then they meet a partner. They put down roots. They might move outside of that dense economic center to a near suburb to raise their family. But if we don't attract them in the first place, they don't land here ever. Looking at this through an equity lens, we also know that our young talent, we consider ourselves in the Detroit area to be a majority minority city, that our young talent, our young black talent, are leaving our state at a higher rate than other groups. They're not finding opportunity here, and they're not choosing to stay. So while we've made efforts to create more talent across the board, what we're finding is that our Generation Z, after they finish college, are simply leaving. I wrote an editorial in the Free Press several months ago. All 3 of my sons no longer live in the state of Michigan. They have all sought opportunity, 2 of them beginning in Chicago, and one of them now trying to land in Chicago from where he is. And so when we find that our highly educated young people are choosing to locate in increasingly and concentrate themselves in increasingly transit-rich, vibrant central city neighborhoods that are walkable and have an active street life, we think, hey, that sounds like Ann Arbor. I saw a couple of you nodding your heads like, hey, we're in line for those young people. So now here's the part where I get to scare you, right? So if we think about Ann Arbor and we think about the idea, what does our young professional population look like compared to other comparable towns? Because Ann Arbor wins all kinds of awards. Very proud to have lived in Washtenaw County when we became the best retirement city, when we became the best this, when we became the best that. But how do we rack up when it comes to looking at the future, when it comes to growing Michigan? So if we look well, we'll first look at Chicago, because how many of us have a friend or relative who's moved to Chicago? Okay, or the area, or a young person. So Chicago anchors a high prosperity knowledge economy region. They have, and we're going to look at a cohort of 25 to 34-year-olds, so kind of young professionals at the start of their career. Chicago has 323,000 25 to 34-year-olds. Combining Detroit, Grand Rapids, Ann Arbor, and Lansing, if I become a bar graph at 323,000 here, combined all 4 cities have 70,000. All 4 cities. Okay. Ann Arbor's a mid-sized talent magnet, has the potential to be a mid-sized talent magnet. So let's look a little bit deeper into Ann Arbor. Our most comparable city in the Great Lakes region is Madison. So if you start looking at census tracts and you look at, again, 25 to 30-year-olds, Madison, colder city, a little bit harder to live in, has 36,000 25 to 34-year-olds. Ann Arbor, 16, less than half. So now if we look at census tracts and say, okay, but Ann Arbor's kind of bigger, let's look at a census tract size and say, okay, well, how do we compare there? If we're looking at census tracts, and the city of Chicago has 69 census tracts with at least 1,000 professional young residents in a census tract, and we all know how big those are. They have another 396 with between 250 and 1,000 young professionals. Madison has 2 census tracts, just 2, with 1,000 25 to 34-year-olds, but they have 4 more with about 500 and about 10 more with 250. So again, where does Washtenaw County and where does Ann Arbor? We had to look at all of Washtenaw County, but the census tract is Ann Arbor based. We have 1 census tract with 250. We don't have a census tract, even one that hits 500, and we definitely don't have one that hits 1,000. We have 1 with 250 young people with bachelor's degrees between the ages of 25 and 34. So looking at this, and the fact that from 2019 to 23, Chicago increased its young talent, this is, pandemic-based, increased their young talent in their city during the pandemic by 20,000 young professionals. Madison increased by 2,258. Ann Arbor declined by nearly 1,300. So if you're looking at the future of a vibrant city and the future of a vibrant state, if we can't keep, create, and retain our young talent, we are going to continue to decline in population. We're continuing to decline in household income. So Michigan Future is all about looking at the data with a cold, clear eye and saying, okay, what's the solution here? Like, how do we change this? We're diehard Michiganders, born, bred, lived here all the time, served our state, both of us, in different ways, in gubernatorial administrations, as well as an elected official. So if we're focused on truly growing Michigan and stopping this decline, we have to pay attention to the fact that the states that grow are the states that work focused to attract and keep young talent. By doing that, it makes money, and that's what you sitting at that desk need. In order to make things happen, you need to make investments. So Mr. Glazier and I, over the past 2 years, have worked very hard at the state level. We created a $5 million pilot that got funding in the last budget cycle, and a $25 million build on that pilot in this budget cycle. And that's what Lou will describe to you today. So what we did was we said, look, to create a high amenity neighborhood, we're going to focus on the places that have the greatest potential for that. That's 4 cities: Detroit, Grand Rapids, Ann Arbor, and Lansing. This $25 million is broken out through a competitive grant process that Lou will describe, and the amount is not evenly distributed. Whoever comes with the best proposal wins the biggest slice of the pie. As we saw with the $5 million grant proposal, it was not distributed equally, equitably, or even to all the cities. And so what this grant, the Michigan Talent Partnership, is looking for is to be able to incentivize the creation of walkable, dense, high public amenity neighborhoods that will keep, attract, and retain our young people. Any questions about the data? Was anybody surprised? I felt like I got a few people's attention. Did that feel like a description of Ann Arbor to you? Okay. Any questions? All right. I will hand it over to Lou to talk about your opportunity now with the Michigan Talent Partnership.
Thanks, Donna, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you. There is $25 million that was allocated for this Michigan Talent Partnership in the current year budget. $18 million is set aside for the 4 cities that Donna mentioned, Detroit, Ann Arbor, Lansing, and Grand Rapids. Each of the 4 cities is guaranteed a grant, but the allocation is entirely competitive. So theoretically, the state could give $17 million to one city and a few $100,000 to the rest. And then the other $7 million is available to the rest of the state kind of thing, with no guarantee. There's no guarantee there. Important components of the grant program. The first is it is for a neighborhood. So each city is going to have to pick a neighborhood that they're making an investment in, and the 4 cities are restricted to one application only. The application has to come from a consortium that includes a local government, a nonprofit, and the business community, and community organizations. And any of the entities of the consortium can be the grantee. So it doesn't have to be this. It could be the city, doesn't have to be the city. Probably the most important thing is the money can only be used for public space investments. So it cannot be used for buildings. It cannot be used for projects. The theory being that it is the public spaces that what creates young professional demand. That, we talk about, if you look around the country, we can use Chicago as an example. Young professionals, even post-pandemic, although a lot of the conventional wisdom is it's not true, but the data says otherwise, are way over-concentrated in big metros with vibrant central cities that are the most expensive places to live. So young professionals are not looking for low-cost places. They're not even looking for low housing cost places, because what they're buying is the neighborhood. They're paying for the neighborhood, not for the housing. So this grant program is to create neighborhoods that have the kind of characteristics that are attracting young professionals from around the country. And I want to repeat what Donna was saying, because I think it's really important. The reason why Michigan Future got interested in this is the single best predictor of the availability of high-wage jobs and high per capita income community is the proportion of adults with a 4-year degree. Nothing else comes close to predicting prosperous states and regions. And the reason that young professionals matter most is they're the most mobile. So the pattern across the country is pretty clear. Where you settle, in this case after college, is the most important decision you make in terms of where you live for your working life. And Michigan, including Ann Arbor, is having trouble attracting young professionals, in large part because we don't have these transit-rich, high-amenity, high-density, walkable neighborhoods that are attracting. So that's what this whole grant program is about. So the ultimate goal is, so the $18 million is not enough money to create these neighborhoods. I mean, it's really a start. What we're hoping for is, particularly in the 4 cities that have been designated as high priority cities, is that they will propose comprehensive plans. I've been saying the $200 million plan, and the $200 million doesn't, but it's what the whole neighborhood would look like. where we at Michigan Future and a number of legislators and some folks in the administration are committed to working to, in addition to this grant program, to getting money out of the other state departments for the rest of the plan. So if there's a road diet, which tends to be really expensive, we will lobby, hopefully with you, to get the transportation department to fund the road diet. If there are parks or outdoor recreation, we will go to DNA. So the plan is not just to do the $18 million proposal, it's to do the comprehensive, with the goal being either through advocacy with the departments or in future budgets to have money that allows for the real creation of these neighborhoods. One other thing I should mention is that there's a 50% local match requirement. So there's a dollar for dollar match. The program will be administered jointly, at least it's the current plan, by Leo and MEDC. Their plan at the moment is to, and they're behind. I want to give you a sense of the timing on this, is to hire a consultant that has sort of subject matter expertise in young professional placemaking, to do two things. One, to help the state develop the RFP and scoring system for choosing the grant winners. But second, also to provide technical assistance, particularly to the 4 cities that have been listed. The original plan was an RFP in January. I think that's not going to happen, given that we're in November already and the consultant hasn't been hired, and on and on. But my hope is early in 2025, the RFP will be out. Hopefully, there will be several months for cities to put proposals in. They have to allocate the money in this fiscal year. The money has to be spent by September 2029. So it's not like it has to be spent immediately. There's 4 years that you have to actually spend the money. So that's the basic parameters of the program. We're pretty excited about it. We've been working on this for a long time. Our hope is that we end up with 4 terrific proposals. The state, this is really, Michigan's become one of the poorest states in the country over the last 25 years. We've gone from a 20th century where we were one of the more prosperous states in the country to now one of the poorest states in the country, in large part because we are not participating in the high-wage, high-growth knowledge economy. You cannot participate in the knowledge economy without professionals, particularly young professionals. And if we don't fix this, we're going to permanently be one of the poorest states in the country. The Metro Detroit numbers look basically like the state. We were a top 15 big metro in the country for most of the 20th century. We're now 49th, I think. So, and we're not reversing, and we think of Ann Arbor as part of Metro Detroit. We're not reversing that unless we become a talent magnet metro. I don't know if you have any questions about the program. I think, so from our perspective, we've been doing this presentation in each of the 4 cities. Our hope is that the cities get started now on A, picking the neighborhood, which is sort of the most important thing, 2, putting together the coalition, and then 3, beginning to develop the plan. Because the boilerplate for this program is pretty explicit. Oh, I forgot this. I forgot probably the most important thing. I should have started with that. There are 2 purposes of the grant program. The first is to create neighborhoods that attract young talent. The second is to create opportunities for locally owned businesses. So those are, and then the boilerplate says in order to do that, the plan has to include investments in public spaces and support for locally owned businesses. So it's pretty explicit. The RFP will have some the details that are necessary, but the boilerplate basically describes the program, so you don't have to wait to begin to work on this. So our hope is that you get to work on it now and and have enough lead time to put together a terrific proposal when the RFP comes out and you're able to meet the deadline, which, is going to be a few months. So I don't know if people have questions about this. Hopefully you're all excited about it as we are, and we begin to take advantage of it. It is, it's disappointing. If you look at the data, it's really disappointing that we have such low talent concentrations, and that since 2019 we're actually going down, not up. I mean, nationally, the number of 25 to 34-year-olds with a four-year degree between 2019 and 2023 is up 9%. I mean, there's really no reason for Ann Arbor to have gone from 17,000 to 16,000.
How is a neighborhood defined?
Good question. So the law doesn't define it. It says the language is neighborhood or district. The way I would define it it would be sort of a set of available public amenities that are walkable. I mean, I think walkable is the most important piece of it. So you don't want to be so far that you can't walk to it. So at least that's how I would think about defining neighborhoods.
You use the phrase, and I haven't looked at the RFP, but
fine.
you say high amenity spaces. What is meant by that?
Oh, high amenities? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's not defined either. I mean, I think the things that we were looking at and that are laid out in the legislation are sort of the streetscape. Right, so it's walkable, bikeable kinds of stuff. It's probably transit. It's certainly parks and outdoor recreation. It's arts on the street. It's third places, bars and restaurants and entertainment. I mean, that's really amenities. So I always say to people, pick your favorite neighborhood in Chicago or Brooklyn. That's high amenities. I mean, that's what you're looking for. Yep.
There. The reason why I ask, and as I'm just thinking through what this program will do, you mentioned Grand Rapids, you mentioned here. I mean, I can think of neighborhoods that I would describe as being that. Clearly, the numbers.
At the moment, 25 to 34-year-olds don't think that way.
Sure. I mean, the numbers are sobering. I hear what you're saying, but that leads me to believe there's much more going on than a neighborhood that has.
Yeah.
And I understand you're not trying to solve all the problems
Right.
with this program, but.
So what most big metros have done is they've started with rail transit, right? I mean, transit's probably the most important thing. It's just, you can't do, the politics of transit in Michigan have turned out to be horrible. This was doable. If I had to start with, if you want to pick the most powerful lever, I'd start with transit. For 50 years, we haven't put the politics together on transit, so this was doable. So
Yeah.
you got to start someplace.
I completely agree on that. I think that's one of the biggest issues. And
No
when I think
question.
about these places being separate, the fact that they're so disconnected and hard to get from one place to another,
question.
I think is a huge driver.
So if anybody's interested in working with us and putting together a pro-transit, particularly rail transit for Metro Detroit, count us in. I mean, we've been talking about this for decades with it just goes no place here.
Thank you. I have a question and then just kind of a general comment.
Yeah.
I appreciate the focus on placemaking and transit, but what about housing? I mean, really at its core.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're looking at this, this nice little presentation that's coming to us, but, you know,
Right.
how do you see that factoring into
No,
what's
I think-
proposed?
So I guess, you know, I mean, this is a chicken and the egg question. You obviously need both. But if you have, the evidence around the country is that if you have housing and you don't have high amenity neighborhoods, young professionals aren't going to come.
Right.
So at least our theory is let's make the public space investments, which hopefully then increase demand, which then leads to should lead to more demand for housing, which hopefully, you know, we can take care of. I mean, if you look at if you go to Chicago today, the first thing you see when you're in the downtown or near downtown areas, all the neighborhoods that are developing, is a zillion cranes basically building young professional housing. So somehow or other they've figured out how to make it work. But what creates the demand for housing is the high amenity neighborhoods plus a pretty good transit system. I mean, it's the two that go together. So you need both. Our sense is that the neighborhood characteristics is what drives the demand for the housing rather than the other way around.
Any other questions? In light of our other presentation, I'll merely say this is an exciting opportunity, and you know, I'm grateful for the presentation, for letting us know what might be in store for us and for all your decades-long attention on this. It's crucial.
Yep, and then feel free to reach out to either Don or I if you have questions, kind of thing. We're around. Good.
We surely will.
Yep, good. Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Thank you both. Mr. Dohoney.
So we'll move on to the discussion of Arbor South. We'll start with the development of city policy, TC1. TC1 sets a tone, creates an environment, creates conditions where we are anticipating density, growth, and development. It is on purpose that we are encouraging higher density than we typically would see. Arbor South is a private development that is within the spirit of TC1. During tonight's presentation, you're going to hear from the development team. They will lay out their vision for Arbor South. You will hear from Jennifer Hall. It is envisioned that affordable housing will be a part of the development, and you will hear from city staff. We have been approached in a formal way by the development team and asked to participate in the project. We are unaware of any other project in Ann Arbor that has ever reached the magnitude of what you're going to hear about. We are also unaware of any other city where a project of this magnitude has occurred without city participation. The only question is, what does the city participation look like? For context purposes, this is a private by right development. These are not city parcels, it's privately owned land. our approach, the administration's approach, for opportunities that come in front of the city, particularly like this, is to try to get to yes. That's how we have approached it. That's what we have been working towards. We are not at a point where all the questions have been answered, but we are far enough along in our work where the project makes sense enough that we are comfortable talking about it publicly. There are no votes that will be taken tonight, and we are not asking for any votes tonight. If everything has been worked out, it is more likely than less likely we will come to you in a formal way asking for you to support city participation. What the development team is asking for is the city to build, own, operate 3 parking decks. This is a development that cannot possibly be built in a year or two. So you're talking about something that would be built over several years. They are not asking for the city to build the parking decks all at once. The parking decks would come online as the development comes online over a period of time. You will hear more about that from Marty and PFM, because what we have been working on is the due diligence around the ask to the city. While we are still working through the due diligence, we believe we are at a point in engaging with our consultant that we can say, if we choose to, we can, in fact, build, own, and operate the parking decks. It's simply a choice that the city would have to make. This project would qualify for a brownfield TIF. For a project of this magnitude, you would be talking about a 30-year TIF. Now, there is an issue aside from the current project that I think is a larger issue for the city. We do not really have infrastructure internally because we don't typically do these kinds of projects. I would submit that it is not unusual, or we should anticipate that developments in other TC1 corridors will result in a development team coming forward asking the city to participate. We shouldn't view it as this is the only time this is going to happen. And if in fact that does happen, I have been talking to the staff about the creation of a parking authority. Other cities have them. It's the proper entity for something like this. It is not possible for a parking authority to be created in time to help this deal. So it's not for Arbor South, but it's a parallel thing that we're giving attention to. The other issue that we're examining is infrastructure. So while we go through the process of celebrating our 200th birthday, we're not old by European standards, but we've got aging infrastructure. So we have to do the due diligence to determine, is the infrastructure in the Eisenhower corridor sufficient to service the kind of development that Arbor South is talking about? It is not that far from Briarwood that is also being redeveloped. While we do not have a final answer, we believe it's more likely than less likely the answer will be the current infrastructure is insufficient to service a development the magnitude of Arbor South. Public Services is working on the due diligence and will provide the information when they have it. Let me make sure I don't leave anything out that I want to say. We do ask that you allow the full presentation to be presented before we get to Q&A. And again, we'll start with the development team, we'll then go to Jennifer Hall, we'll then go to Marty, and then PFM after that. And we'll all be involved in the Q&A at the end. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff Hopman, who should be online. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Jeff Hopman is joining us on Zoom.
Mr. Hauptman, you are inaudible. I see you here on the clerk screen, but you're not coming in yet on the screen that we are receiving here in chambers, or that's going out via CTN. So if you can sit tight, we'll see if we can figure it all out. There you are. You are now visible. There you go. We got audio.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. You're both visible and audible.
Wonderful. And I can't see the deck. Is that also being shared on Zoom?
It will be. It is not presently.
Okay. Whenever the deck is ready, I'll proceed.
The deck appears to be up. Are you still audible?
I am here.
Excellent.
Wonderful. All right. Let's go to the next slide then.
It's working. Let's roll.
Okay. I'm up. All right. Hey, thank you for the opportunity to share with you a project that is over 6 years in the making. I'm Jeff Hauptman, CEO of Oxford, and I have the pleasure of introducing Arbor South and the team behind it. My apologies for not being here tonight with you. I hope to see you in future meetings. As many of you know, I'm a local public school kid, Thurston, Clegg, Huron, U of M. After working a few years out of college, I founded Oxford. Click. And Oxford's team of 100 plus people, we manage one of the largest commercial portfolios, portfolios of commercial and residential in town. We're a full service real estate investment company. And our focus is on Ann Arbor, and Ann Arbor only. And a big part of what we do is we try to make everything around us a little better. Focus tonight is on the south side, State and Eisenhower. So why here? First off, this is kind of the Oxford territory. This is where we spend a lot of our time. We have a lot invested in this neighborhood. from Maine, State, South Industrial, and Eisenhower. We spend a lot of time thinking about how can we improve this area. Now, it's a main entrance to Ann Arbor, as everyone knows, from State 94. It's also the largest office and retail center in the entire county. Land, as a general rule, is far less expensive than other parts of town. And almost half the commuters coming to Ann Arbor each day enter at State in 94. So it's a really important part of town. So with so many benefits, the South Side, as we call it, a diamond in the rough. With help, the city could make this Southern Gateway into a neighborhood. Kind of wishing Lou Lacer stuck around now. The low density and acres of parking lots offers tremendous opportunities for redevelopment, yielding thousands of units of desperately needed housing. So we began discussing ideas on how to develop the area years ago with the plan department. And those discussions evolved. They went to city council, and thank you, city council, we now have TC1 zoning. And the opportunity to address affordable housing, placemaking, and sustainability on a much larger scale. Next slide. So it all begins here. This is the parking lot surrounding the iconic 777 building. You'll note to the west that's State Street going north and south, and Eisenhower just below it going east-west. In this area outlined by the orange lines there, we envision more than 1,000 diverse residential units in a walkable neighborhood, allowing surrounding residents, all the neighborhoods around this area, the ability to access amenities by bike or foot with easy connectivity to AAA ATA. That means over 1,500 people will be able to live, work, and play here, with most households being able to significantly limit their use of cars. This will be a community hub, creating an energy like never seen in the area. But we had to find someone to help us bring our vision to fruition. We do a lot of things at Oxford, but we don't do ground-up development. So, next slide, please. We spent over 2 years meeting with developers from all around the Midwest. Lots of them tried to say, oh, we could do this, we could do that, we'll build this big apartment tower, but it wasn't right. We were trying to find the right partner who shared both the vision and the culture. And we discovered something really special. This is Bridge Park in Dublin, Ohio. And it's exactly what we envisioned. Walkable ground floor retail with housing and offices above. Parking structures kind of hidden, strategically interspersed throughout the development, just enough to make it work. Gathering spaces scattered throughout. Great energy. And that led us to a partnership with Crawford Hoyne, its developer. The Crawford Hoyne team has done over $2 billion in mixed-use developments like this. So we feel very comfortable they have the experience and the resources necessary to make Arbor South a success. And with that, I'd like to introduce Russ Hunter, one of the visionaries behind what we've designed, to introduce the development and the Crawford Hoyne team. Russ?
Thank you, Jeff. And good evening, everybody. So I lead our development team at Crawford Hoyne. Russell Hunter is my name. And in a previous life, I was an architect. It's actually what I went to school for. Architect and planning, did that for over 10 years before I joined our team. I always like to say I was actually the development company. I was our first hire. So I'm really, really excited about the opportunity that we have here in front of us with Arbor South. And it's simply about scale. It's not very often that you get a site that has this amount of scale that gives you the flexibility to do some really, really impressive things. Placemaking. I could not believe I was hearing that word earlier tonight, because that's really what we're setting out to do. The ability to create a neighborhood where you can control both sides of the street. That is placemaking, where everything is around a central hub. At the end of the day, for me, it's not about the buildings, it's the spaces between them that make the place special. And that's really what we're trying to do here. So complete streets, gateway opportunities, open spaces, both public and private. This is really, really important. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's sort of backyard versus front yard mentality. When you think about the people that want to call this home, you want to be able to bring everyone into your home, but you also want to be able to have private outdoor spaces that you can feel comfortable in. And neighborhood programming, and this is another thing we'll talk about later, but I think it's a lot of lessons that we've learned specifically at Bridge Park and that we've taken to some of our other communities that is a game changer and for the sort of community building that you can do with an opportunity like this. So this is the program. Jeff had already mentioned, this is housing first, right? And you can see that it's over 1,000 units of housing. We've got a really wonderful opportunity in front of us in that we've got a lot of existing office space here, existing leased high-quality office space. So what that allows us to do is to create an environment that is busy during the day and busy at night. And that is key to your commercial tenant success. And so when you talk about dynamic ground floor retail, entertainment, all of the sort of commercial services, that is absolutely vital to their success. Organized around that central spine, that central open space that we talked about, and trying to find ways in which we're controlling the street, so we're controlling both sides of the street trees, parking spots, that sort of thing, but also making sure that we are integrating the existing buildings as well, which weren't designed with some of those things in mind. And so some of the smaller jewel buildings in the middle are meant to make sure that we're breaking down the scale so that all of these buildings feel like they're a part of something bigger. This is an early render for that central open space. And I say early because there's not nearly enough green in it. It drives me nuts every time I see it. However, there is something really, really important in this image that I think I want to make sure I get across, and that is that this place, and especially when you get here, needs to feel like we've softened the edges so that the pedestrian feels primary and the car feels separate. We can't ignore the fact that people are going to have cars here, but that doesn't mean that they have to rule the streets. And so we've been looking at ways in which asphalt becomes paving, right, where there aren't curb lines, but rather bollards. The idea that for certain events, we could shut the streets down completely, and yet the serviceability of the neighborhood would be maintained. And which is a part of what that grid of streets that we created is really, really important. And the location of the entrances and exits to those garages become vital. There are some lessons that, quite frankly, we learned the hard way at Bridge Park that we bring here to make sure that we can do it a little bit better every time. These are all examples of the open spaces that I'm talking about. And so you can see some of these, they're big, they're grand. The idea is that whether you live there or not, you still feel like you're home there. But then there are other spaces, and some of them elevated, where these become amenities for the residents themselves. And they feel like they have something special as well. These are the types of spaces that we will define. If they get used, that defines success for us, because that it's that sort of dynamic atmosphere that what Lou and Donna were talking about earlier, that we've found at a multitude of places that we developed, is that if you can create that sense of place, it sort of solves a lot of other issues for you. these are a couple images of Bridge Park. So we have an events team that I like to, I lead our development group, and yet our events group, I swear, has more employees than my group does. But they're vital to the success of our places. These are two of our larger events that we do at Bridge Park, and in both cases, we shut the whole place down. The Longshore Street for about 2,000 feet is completely shut down. It's the heart of our neighborhood. The one on the left, Four Fest, so we are blessed in that there's the Memorial Tournament, PGA Tournament, happens just down the road from us, and so this is actually a music event that we do in concert with their organization. This one gets about 8,000 folks. It's the weekend right before the tournament. And then the Dublin Market, which is every single Saturday, we do for the entire summer, some spring, some fall, and again, thousands of people come to this. And the other thing that's really, this is kind of just special about this to me, but I think it's important here. These started out 10 years ago as an idea that a couple of us had to say, there's no reason why we can't do this. If we built the space right, if we designed the space right, these sorts of things should be successful. And dear friend of mine is no longer with us, but these were his brainchild, and they worked. And so we really think that this can work here as well. Lastly, wanted to touch a little bit on phasing. These phase 1 through 5, I would say this is more of a rolling project. The intention is not to build one and then wait for the other, but rather that these are continuing to come online. We understand critical mass is important here, meaning like if you are trying to open an apartment over on this side of the street and on this side of the street, you've still got a lot of construction, that's not really good for anybody. But there are existing parking lots in place and an existing parking garage in place that we have got to thread carefully through as we redevelop this land to make sure that we are not shortchanging the folks that already call this neighborhood home, at least as far as work is concerned. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Jeremiah. I think I get to have a lot of fun in that I create all of these ideas. He's really, really good at working with groups, cities like this, and consultant teams like ours to figure out how to make this reality. So with that, I will give it to Jeremiah. Sir.
Hello all, and thanks again. Thank you for inviting us today. Again, my name is Jeremiah Thomas. I'm Chief Operating Officer of Crawford Hoying, and prior to joining Crawford Hoying, I'd been working on public-private partnerships for 7 or 8 years before starting to put stuff online and in-house with the team. And as Russ said, what we try to do is take these beautiful ideas and these concepts of creating a vibrant community and making them real, and making them real not just for us, but for the communities that we live in. I think one of the things that we pride ourselves on as a development team, as a company, and that we feel like we found a real kindred spirit with Jeff Hauptman and the Oxford team with, is that what we build has to be authentic to the communities that we're building it in. One thing I can promise you is that Arbor South will not be Bridge Park, but it will not be Bridge Park in all the ways that you want it to not be Bridge Park. It will be of this community, it'll be for this community, and it will be something the community can be proud of and call its own, and that's what we hope to bring to life for it. Among the things that is very important to us and that we understand is very important to the city and the community here at large is the concept of economic diversity within our communities. It's something that we've striven for at our other developments. It makes for a healthier development if there's economic diversity within the housing. Housing itself is a need that we know within Ann Arbor, and it's one that we're committed to providing, but we've also been working very closely with Jennifer Hall at the Ann Arbor Housing Commission to work on a plan that allows us to bring some affordable housing. And if you look to the top right of the diagram in this particular site plan, this is a site pad that we've done some schematic planning for the Affordable Housing Commission for bringing some affordable housing to the front end of this project. And I think that's an important component of one of the public benefits that we're hoping to bring here, and I think maybe a little unique to this development versus some others. We're really working on ensuring that there's a delivery of real units to serve a real need in the community, and to do so not pro rata as we build the development, but hopefully to the front end of this project as we're able to work through it with Jennifer and her team. I don't want to speak for Jennifer, and I am going to hop back up after she gives a little bit more detail on the deal that we're working on and frame up a little bit of the ask, and then invite Marty up to talk about the city's perspective and diligence on that, and I'll be available for questions later. So, Jennifer.
Good evening. I'm here to stay in my lane and talk about affordable housing tonight. You've probably never heard this. Development is very difficult, risky, and expensive. It's complex, and affordable housing is that much more difficult. I know you've never heard this either, but developing in Ann Arbor is even more expensive and difficult than most other communities. Consequently, whenever there's an opportunity to develop a significant number of affordable housing in the city of Ann Arbor, it is valuable, and it's worthy of supporting. And so that's what I'd like to talk about. As has been mentioned, Arbor South is proposing to develop about 1,000 housing units, and approximately 200 of those will be affordable. The Housing Commission is working with city staff and the Arbor South team to ensure that the affordable housing is well constructed, sustainable, and affordable to households at 60% of AMI or less, which this year is roughly at the high end, $50,000 for one person, $72,000 for a four-person household. That's at the upper end. The city's tried many different strategies to increase affordable housing built by market rate developers, primarily through zoning and brownfield TIF policies. Since the 1990s, and I've been here that whole entire time, the total number of affordable housing and rental and owner units developed by market rate developers that still have city deed restrictions on them is about 50 units, so that's over 40 years. I personally have been an advocate for many of those policies and strategies over the years, but it wasn't until I became the director of the Housing Commission, and we both own and manage units, as well as work with private developers with our voucher program, that I realized that we as the city, we're trying to make a square peg fit into a round hole by requiring market rate developers to build our affordable housing within their market rate units. Which is why folks have heard me talk about the fact that I encourage cash in lieu as opposed to building units in market rate developments. And that way our mission-oriented developers can develop, own, and manage the affordable housing. Arbor South is requesting brownfield TIF financing, which would require them over the course of their entire development to build either 15% of affordable units, which is about 150 units, or provide a cash in lieu contribution of roughly $10 million over the entirety of the project. We are proposing an alternative that is more beneficial, I think, to city residents. The Arbor South development team is presenting an incredible opportunity for us to take advantage of their expertise in the financial leverage that they're able to do as a market rate developer to build the affordable housing that will be owned by and managed by a mission-based entity, which is the Ann Arbor Housing Commission, to take advantage of our expertise of actually managing the affordable housing. We are targeting for these units to be delivered as part of the first phase of the 5-phase development. That means that we'll have actual units to help with our housing, both sooner than we would have if they delivered them as 15% of each phase, as well as sooner than if we had them provide a fee in lieu that then comes as each phase is completed, and then the funds would go to an entity to develop, so that takes a much longer time to actually get the units up and running. In addition, there are a lot of economies of scale to develop a site this large. So when you're doing 1,000 units versus 50 units, you can spread some cost across all those units, and it brings the per unit cost down on the affordable housing. These 200 units will not be typical Housing Commission apartments, as we will not be setting aside units for homeless households, because that requires a much deeper subsidy that we don't have available right now. However, the rents will be lower than market rate, and they will not come with project-based vouchers like our other properties, but they will be available to people who have tenant-based vouchers if they apply. People with special needs will be welcome, because we are in the business of screening people in, not screening people out. The majority of renters will be people who are working, likely in the $40,000 to $70,000 range. The affordable housing will be deed restricted, like all of our other affordable housing, to make sure it has long-term affordability. The Housing Commission will work closely with the Arbor South team on the architectural design, the accessibility of the units and the common areas, as well as the sustainability of the operations. It will have similar interior and exterior finishes as the market rate housing, so it blends into the development. The Housing Commission is also working closely with the Arbor South team to secure long-term financing, because the Housing Commission will be acquiring the affordable housing from the developer after it is built, and we will need to assume that financing. Arbor South is taking on a significant financial risk with guarantees related to the construction financing, and they will oversee and manage the development process in the same way that the Housing Commission hires a developer at our other development sites that we have developed. It's worth repeating that Arbor South will build more than the minimum number of required apartments under the Brownfield TIF policy of 150 units, with a goal of about an additional 50. Which by themselves, those 50 units will cost approximately $12 million for the developer to deliver to the Housing Commission. We will be partners throughout the process, and then the Housing Commission will take ownership after everything's built and is ready for occupancy. Like other Housing Commission projects, the Housing Commission will leverage local millage funds by maximizing non-local funds, which will require us to comply with those funding sources on the underwriting side and ongoing monitoring. Thereby, the Housing Commission will need the city to bond for the equity portion required for a mortgage, which is currently estimated at roughly $8 to $12 million. It will be very similar to what we did at Catherine Street, where we did a $9 million bond, and the future repayment will come from annual millage revenue. The Arbor South team will make their financial contribution to the affordable housing through a combination of the assumption of the risk, the financial guarantees, the foregone profit, and the combination of which we estimate to be far north of the $10 million it would have otherwise been as a cash in lieu contribution through the Brownfield TIF program. As it relates to the affordable housing, I stand behind the development that Arbor Health is presenting and their commitment and willingness to partner with the Housing Commission in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. So, public-private partnership gets thrown around a lot, and I think Jennifer talked a little bit about part of our vision for what a public-private partnership looks like here, and in this case, it's our ability to help leverage the site at large and just the scale and the scope of this project to deliver affordable units more cheaply than they otherwise could be and more efficiently, larger numbers earlier. But the reality is, for a project like this, and Milton talked about it earlier, for something of this scale to happen, there has to be coordination between local governments and the private developer, and it has to be a win-win situation where everybody leaves feeling like they're getting out of it what they're looking for, and specifically what we're all looking for is, this vibrant, walkable community with these public amenities that we heard Lou talk about earlier, and this concept of an entertainment district where people want to be. And that is really a commitment that we're making to the city, that we want to build a place that we're all proud of. We want to build a place that's iconic. We want to build a place that does justice to the southern entrance to the city, and that is another node for density in addition to the beautiful downtown that Ann Arbor already has, and that it serves as an inspiration for us to build onto. I think our commitment to build those beautiful spaces simply needs supported by standard city-supported infrastructure, and I think the most natural place for that fit in this instance, and many of you are already aware, is, in our opinion, is for the parking garages, the construction, ownership, and management of those parking garages long-term. There's all kinds of reasons why parking is a healthy thing for a city and a municipality to control, but there's also a reality that we're in a shifting environment of parking needs, and we want to support a phasing structure in that shifting environment that ensures two things. One is that as we look to the brownfield TIF as a source of repayment for the cost of constructing these parking garages, that the private improvements that are being constructed alongside those parking garages are delivered at the same pace as are required to generate the TIF proceeds that will be that financing source. The second is, and this has been an experience that we've had at most of our other multi-phase mixed-use developments, you have to build the most parking in the first phase, and you learn that you can be more creative with shared parking solutions as you go along, and we never want to overbuild parking, one, for the public good, but then two, just simply it's an efficient use of space, and we'd like to see more housing and more vibrancy and more entertainment and more open spaces created as we go along. And so our phasing plan is based on our assumption that each phase of this development will have to the parking will have to be self-supported for those phases, and that it will have to be targeted for the phase as we move along, so that we're never building more than's necessary, and never overbuilding it from a financial standpoint. The final thing I'll say that we're absolutely committed to do is we will guarantee the completion of the private improvements required to support the TIF revenue in order to generate the proceeds for constructing the parking garages. And we absolutely recognize that the city is going to be looking for some backstops to make sure that there's adequate TIF revenue, and we're committed to make sure that the financing structures are sound for the city. Again, if this long-term partnership doesn't work for both the city of Ann Arbor and for Arbor South, then we will not feel like we've met our commitment here. A couple of quick points before handing it off to Marty to talk about the city's diligence process and the financing more generally. One is just a quick illustration here of how we have already designed a parking infrastructure that we think is an efficient parking plan. Currently at the site, if you look at the existing parking deck and the existing surface parking spaces, for almost 400,000 square feet of commercial space, there are 1,500 spaces. That's 3.81, almost four spaces per 1,000 square feet. After completion of all of the phases as currently designed, we're looking at about 2,600 spaces, but those 2,600 spaces are going to service almost 2.5 million total square feet. That brings the parking ratio down to, about 1 per 1,000 on a square footage basis. And so while we are building additional parking, while we are building parking to support this denser environment that I think we all want and to support all the additional housing that we want, the design is meant to be as parking efficient as possible. Part of the reason that we're able to do this, by the way, is because we have existing office use that is going to support a fair amount of these spaces. And what we've learned through these mixed-use developments is that we're able to plan our parking in a very efficient and shared manner. Office users and restaurant users have some overlap during times of day where both need parking, but typically office users are daytime users. Restaurant users and residential users are nighttime users, as are hotel users. And so we think that we're going to be able to share spaces in a way that's an efficient use of the space, an efficient use of the parking garages, reduce the cost to the city, reduce the footprints of these parking garages, increase the amount of vibrancy we're able to create with the rest of the development. The other thing worth noting is some of these transportation stats as it relates to the percentage of people that drive alone to work, whether it be to downtown, and this shows the stats of what the commercial square footage is downtown, and then the percentage of people that drive alone to work to the south side, and the relative size of the commercial square footage on the south side right now dwarfs the population, particularly if you compare it to the population of downtown compared to the commercial square footage downtown. What this tells us is that there's room for a denser node on the south side of the city, allowing housing to be closer to the jobs that are already on the south side of the city, and hopefully allowing fewer people to drive alone to work, allowing more people to access work either through walkways and bike paths or public transportation, and regardless providing housing that would be a shorter drive to work nonetheless. And so all of this is really a handoff over to Marty to say, we've put a lot of thought into an efficient development. We're very thoughtful about using the dollars wisely, both our own and the TIF dollars that we're talking about. And we're very thoughtful about putting in development that will take advantage of the things that Lou and Donna were talking about earlier. That sense of placemaking is important. It's not just important to young professionals, it's important to most people that want to live in walkable urban environments. And our experience in our other developments, Bridge Park being a prime example of it, was actually that our earliest stage adopters to Bridge Park were empty nesters. The first couple that moved into Bridge Park was a couple of retirees that were, I think, 77 and 74 years old at the time. Those were our first residents, and even today, what we've seen, because we've created an environment where people want to be, is that about a third of our residents are empty nesters. About a third of our residents are young professionals, say between the ages of 24 and 35. And then the other third makes up the middle between those young professionals and those empty nesters. If you build something great, everybody wants to be there, and that's what we're hoping to do, and we're looking forward to doing that with your support and with the support of staff. And with that, I'll turn it over to Marty. Didn't mean to steal that from you.
Pardon me.
Good evening. My role this evening is to explain the due diligence process the city has undertaken to date for this particular development. To be clear, our due diligence has only just begun, and we have additional work to do in this area. But before I begin, I first want to provide a brief overview or explanation of the funding mechanism you've heard about tonight, which is the Brownfield Tax Increment Financing Tool. For purposes of educating the public and also reminding us of all of how that process works, the Brownfield TIF is a funding tool that covers additional costs associated with redeveloping a brownfield property. In this particular project, the brownfield comes into place when we're talking about the gas station that is on the site. The increase in the value results in an increase in value due to the project results in an increase in property tax paid to the taxing authorities, which we call the increment. And when I say taxing authorities, that's all the taxing authorities, not just the city of Ann Arbor. That increment is captured by the taxing authority, which in this case is Washtenaw County, who then disperses and uses that money to reimburse eligible activities in the brownfield plan. The brownfield activities that are eligible for reimbursement are defined in the Brownfield Redevelopment Financing Act and require both local approval by the city and the county. Once the costs of the actual project eligible activities have been reimbursed, the taxing authorities then can collect the full value of the increase in the tax revenue for that particular project. The proposal brought to the city for this project, as Mr. Dohoney mentioned, included the city owning and operating 3 parking decks. Those parking decks, as you have heard, were intended to be phased. The estimate for those 3 parking decks, including financing costs, is about $104 million based on the pro forma that we recently reviewed. The anticipated TIF revenue generated would in turn be used to satisfy the debt payments taken out to finance the construction of the parking decks. The plan would be for the city to own and operate the decks, likely via a third party initially, and then eventually, as Mr. Dohoney mentioned, by use of creating a parking authority, which we anticipate will be needed for additional development in the TC1 corridor. The city engaged PFM Consulting to complete an economic and financial analysis of the Arbor South development. Kevin Plesner, who is joining us via Zoom, was the PFM lead on this project and is here to answer any detailed questions should we need to engage him. Phase 1 of the analysis that we asked Kevin and his team to look at was to review the developer's pro forma, which Crawford Hoying very cooperatively handed over and explained and worked very closely with Kevin. And Kevin took a look at all the assumptions, including sensitivity analysis related to the anticipated parking revenue, as well as the TIF assumptions. We then further engaged the PFM team and followed up with a request for analysis to look at the development return on investment with and without the city's participation, and to determine how the land was being valued in the proposal, and also finally an estimated cost of the city's total subsidy. In our most recent ask of PFM, we asked them to evaluate a reimbursement model as opposed to issuing debt to fund the structures. So in essence, we wanted to know what the model would look like if we chose to reimburse Crawford Hoying directly as opposed to pulling out debt. And then we also asked them to compare the revenue streams, taxing the tax revenue associated with the parking decks versus the parking revenue stream. The results of those analyses to date are as follows. Essentially, PFM indicated that the developer's base case assumptions of parking revenue and the tax value analysis are consistent with existing market rates. The estimated TIF generated from the project would be enough to reimburse the construction of the garages and allow for additional infrastructure investment. In this case, likely the investment, as Mr. Dohoney mentioned previously, would be going towards utility capacity in that corridor. What that current investment in the utility capacity is at this point, we do not know. Currently, Public Services is engaged in a comprehensive master plan to determine that recommendation as well as cost estimates. It should be noted that this is a 30-year commitment of TIF revenue, and that council will be approached with at least 3 bond issuances as the phased parking goes into place. And as Jennifer mentioned, the city will likely have to bond and leverage the affordable housing millage for her to complete her transaction for the affordable housing as part of this project. In addition, the review that PFM looked at was a 10-year pro forma, which indicated the parking garages would be revenue positive. It was also determined by the analysis that the development does require city participation to be financially viable. The internal rate of return and return of equity with the city's participation are within industry standards for a project of this size. We looked at the land value estimated as part of this project, and it's estimated to be $43.2 million. Again, as I mentioned, the city's investment for this pro forma estimated to be $104 million, which covers the cost of the 3 parking decks and the land associated with those decks. The utilization of the reimbursement model appears to be a potential option. We took a look at this option that would increase the city's cost, however, decrease the risk associated with it. So at this point, early on in the analysis, it appears that this is a viable option. I would say that more detailed scoping of that option has to occur on both sides of the coin, both by the city and the development team. And then finally, if we strictly compare the revenue streams associated with the parking revenue to the tax associated with the parking decks, the parking revenue would exceed the tax revenue. That, of course, is contingent upon the appropriate parking rates, the number of permits issued, and the scaling of the project appropriately. That also is based on the pro forma data set that was provided by the development team and reviewed by PFM. Public-private development partnerships that utilize brownfield TIF are quite common. What is not common is the amount and the size of this particular brownfield. Each project on this list is unique in nature and presents its own challenges, risks, and rewards. Listed here are a few noteworthy projects that include many mixed-use developments, and some include parking components. What's next? After tonight, we expect council to consider the proposal that is before them and provide feedback for staff to continue a due diligence process, all including financial and economic analysis, consideration of a parking authority, the utility capacity requirements, and then the potential bond issuances for both the parking decks and the affordable housing component. All of that will inform the deal and the deal structure and the negotiations with the development team. And then finally, we end up with an agreement with Oxford and Crawford Hoying. That is all I have. Are there any questions?
No, not yet. No questions yet.
No questions yet.
That's all I had as well.
So questions, yes. Do you want to wrap up, Mr. Cahonen?
Well, what I think we all glean, and every time we deal with this project, we hear this is a very complicated development. The phasing part allows all of the pieces to fall into place. The hard option that we have to choose from, we're still working on that, but we will come to you when we know what that is. Jennifer has spoken about her portion, and we are prepared to do the bonding for her portion, which we've already done. It wasn't a trial one, but we've already done one with Catherine Street, so we know we can do that. Any other people can answer questions based on what your questions are, so it'll be different folks coming up depending on what you want to talk about.
Got Councilmember Medina first, and Councilmember Dish.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few initial questions at least, and I think maybe I'll start with the affordable housing. I'll try to keep them all together. Thank you, Ms. Hall. So I guess my first question with respect to affordable housing, and I know that we're doing this across, and we've talked about this at various capacities, and really the ability for us to maximize the number of units by your ability to turn $1 into multiple dollars is important. I guess one of the questions that I have around this specific development is that with the brownfield TIF, there are some affordable housing requirements involved, and I think it's up to 15% of the units would need to be affordable. So I guess I wonder, specific to this site, what are some of the additional benefits of having the Housing Commission kind of take ownership of this? It sounds like we are getting a few more units than that 15%. Obviously, there are some services involved. Are there other benefits we should be thinking about as opposed to kind of falling back on the 15% requirement in the brownfield? And then kind of connected to that, I assume, based on what I heard from you, that that phase one that we saw on the map is the affordable housing component. I guess I wonder, knowing that the phase 5 was the piece that was next to it, phase 2 was next, for how long will the affordable housing piece be disconnected from the rest of that neighborhood? And then I guess also thinking about where that kind of central corridor is and the things that we're thinking about, what is the level of access that the affordable housing units will have to the rest of that space? And I ask this question specifically because obviously one of the benefits of not having a single affordable housing commission-owned space means that you might have kind of more mixed income housing throughout, and there are obviously benefits to that as well. And so that's kind of my initial big question in the affordable housing section.
I think the single biggest benefit is the willingness for the developer to include 200, that's our goal, of affordable units rather than the minimum required of 150. 50 is a standard sort of LIHTC tax credit deal, is like 50, 60 units. So that's like an entire project for us that we wouldn't have to do. Really, it's like 4 of them because we're talking about 200 units. It's much more significant than what we could do on our own. The cost is going to be much less because of being part of this larger project. And I personally, I mean, obviously it's a self-interest with our organization, but my observations of how the affordable housing developments have worked historically, I do see a much bigger benefit when a mission-owned nonprofit owns the affordable housing units. I'm a U of M grad as well, so this is nothing against U of M students, which need housing, but a lot of times we end up getting students in our housing. We cannot, it's a fair housing issue. You can't discriminate because of what someone's student status is. But if we have a mission-driven project, it tends to be more of low-income workers in the community and not U of M students. And I like the fact that U of M is going to be taking care of that issue themselves in the near future. And on the second question, I actually would need JT to talk about that.
Thank you. The phasing question is a good one, and there's a couple of overlapping reasons, as I mix my metaphors here, for the location. A primary reason is that the particular location that is targeted for this portion of the development it's pad ready. There's minimal demo that needs to happen. It is on frontage that will largely reuse some of the streetscape that's existing on the site. It also has access to the eastern portion of the site already, so it is not impacted by some of the other phasing. That is a reason for it to be there. As it relates to the connectivity to the rest of the development, it's actually not going to be on an island at any point in time. Directly across from it, from a north-south standpoint, directly to the south, is actually the existing parking deck and the adjacent sliver of a lot that's next to that parking deck. So a portion of the reason that that particular building is going to that portion of the site is because there's parking infrastructure existing that can support it while we build the rest of the site. It's a uniqueness of this site overall that in order to support the office uses that are already there, we need to phase the project so that existing parking deck stays in place while we do the early phases. So that parking structure will service the affordable housing components, and it'll service our initial phases while we're building the parking garages there, and it'll service the office phases. And then it won't be until we have enough parking infrastructure built at other portions of the site that will demo that parking deck in favor of more dense, mostly housing and entertainment uses, and a taller and more efficient parking deck. So at no point in time, with the small exception of when we're going through the demo and construction of the stuff there in front of the affordable housing building itself, at no point in time will it actually be disconnected from what's there. It will be connected day one to that parking deck, and then when you look at the project at full completion, it's just going to be a continuation of the development at large. And so, but there's some uniqueness to the existing parking situation that's dictating sort of that sequencing. So.
Yeah, the next piece that I will jump into, and then I'm going to pass it along to others, is speaking, you segue into parking. And so I guess, one, I wanted to ask about how you landed on kind of the needs of parking. Is 3 decks necessary versus 2 decks? Like, what is the formulation that went into that, acknowledging that some of our downtown structures have entire floors of vacancy all the time? And I guess, again, since this will be my last question here, I'll throw an addition onto it, as we're talking about placemaking and obviously hoping that maybe some of the people who are living in these new units are working in this neighborhood and, frequenting the restaurants in this neighborhood, what are some of one of the things I didn't hear or think about, or I think in this, is what are some of the alternative transit methods that you're thinking about to create connectivity to the rest of the city? Sure. Are there plans for large scale, bike sharing or bicycle parking? Are there plans, are you working with the RIDE to develop, an express route downtown? Sure. So that this isn't an alternative downtown, but it's an extension of our city? And so I guess I think about all of that as I think about the parking needs versus the people needs.
Absolutely. So from the total spaces in the deck structure, there's a lot of overlapping considerations that goes into that as well. And there's a combination of national resources on parking sharing that we've relied on from a parking study standpoint, largely inclusive of those put out by the Urban Land Institute. But also, this is not our only development of scale, and and we're basing this on our experience. And at every phase that we've built in prior developments, and Bridge Park being the most stark of it, every additional phase has required less and less parking. And I think the learning that we've done from our prior developments has us looking at a tighter parking ratio here than we've used at other developments, because we've seen excess parking that's allowed us to scale back and really maximize the parking in our other developments. And we do not want empty parking decks or empty parking floors. So the overall need is based on experience and studies. The 3 decks is based on financing considerations. And specifically, you heard me talk a little bit earlier about how we're going to line up the phasing so that the private improvements fully support the bond service for each of the individual parking decks. And what we've done is we've taken a development, tried to allocate the parking at the right places in the development so it has the least negative impact on the feel on the street, so that the density is still among active uses, not among parking, but then also spaced it out so that our private improvements can be constructed alongside the parking decks in a way that there's never an economic shortfall. So the total spaces is a function of experience and need. The number of decks and the way those total spaces is divided is a lot about the financial magic that goes into this. Responding to your question more about connectivity and transportation, there's absolutely going to be connection to the city's walk paths and bike paths. That's an important part of the development for us. There is no Class A development that we have in our entire portfolio where we don't have a substantial consideration for things like secure bike rooms for residents, and where applicable, commercial tenants as well. There will absolutely be on-street or in-garage options. We're still working through the engineering for the public at large to have bike connectivity. We've been in pretty consistent communication with the Transit Authority on what their plans are and how our development may impact their plans. I think some of the infrastructure discussions that Milton alluded to in his prior remarks, some of the investigations ongoing, exactly what the right needs are. We want to make sure that we're providing connectivity to the right places, and we also want to make sure we're providing connectivity that's in demand. And, you know, downtown is more than just one node as well in Ann Arbor. And so as it relates to that connectivity, I think that's a discussion that's ongoing, but we do see it as very important, and it is part of the longer term discussions with the city staff and really with our internal people from a demand standpoint, because if there's a transportation demand, that's a demand that exists amongst our consumer base as well, and we want our consumer base to be happy. So thank you.
Councilor British.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It's been, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh, I'm
If you
sorry.
don't mind, if I could answer part of Travis's question. Derek reminded me of something important, which is that the Housing Commission, like our full-time job is affordable housing. We're constantly doing income certifications, like that's our job, our inspections, that's our business. Those 50 units I mentioned during my presentation that the city has under a deed restriction with scattered site market rate developers, that is contracted with the county. The county actually does that income certification, and so they have 50 units. That's a little piece of what they do as their job. We have over 2,000 units. That's what we do all day long, and they don't have the capacity to add 150, 200 units into that contract that we have with them, but that's something that we can absorb as just part of our regular job.
Councilor British.
Okay. I will try not to forget to write that down. But, okay, I would like, again, thank you for the presentation. This is this is an important step toward our vision of TC1. But I want to keep talking about parking because what we hope to do is get people out of their cars. And so I would like to talk a little bit more into the details about the assumptions that are being made about the financial benefits to the city, the trade-offs. And then I want to ask a couple questions about future-proofing. So in your answer to Councilmember Redina, you talked about your calculation of the overall need for the parking based on, you've drawn on resources and prior experience, but you noted that the number of decks and where they are placed has to do with the financial magic. That was your quote. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with financial magic. And so if you could clarify that, that would be great. And let me just say a couple, do you want all my questions up front or do you want to jump in? Okay, I'm okay with wherever. I mean, if I would forget, actually. But anyway, so please clarify that. Then I would like to have a few more details, and this may be either you or Ms. Prashant, I'm not sure who's right to ask, but I'd like to know what the difference is between the parking revenue that you estimate that the city would receive and the taxes that would be paid if the decks were not owned by the city. So I'd like to understand what the difference is between those numbers. And I'd like to understand a little bit more about how you are making your estimate for what the parking revenues from these decks would be. And I don't know if you have a number, but if you did, I would be curious to know it. And then, so then my third and final question about this part is, parking infrastructure is inconsistent with our vision for these transit corridors, yet we understand that we are in a transition and that people, as you said, are not going to give up their cars right away. People are likely to move from 2 to 1 car household, but we're not going to see, the cars are not going to go away. Now, this project acknowledges that, I believe, because I've been in on some of the things through Planning Commission, by building the parking structures so that they can be repurposed. And what I want to understand is, how can we assure that the parking structures will be designed and built to the utmost standard that we will need them in the future to repurpose them? Because you're building them, we're taking them on, we're maintaining them. We want to be sure in 15 or 20 years, and I'm being optimistic, when we want to put housing or make those structures into housing or put some housing on top of them and put some into it, they're not crumbling.
Thank you. So I think, did I count 4 total questions or was it 5? Okay. I'll work through it. And if I miss one, draw me back to it. I apologize. So I think the first one that I picked up on was about the concept of future-proofing generally, not necessarily the parking structure design, but future-proofing. And I think there's a couple component parts that to the plan that we have been discussing that help with future-proofing. One we've talked about already, which is phasing, and we want to make sure that we're building the parking as we go to suit the uses as we go. I think another really important component part of the core thesis of what's being proposed is that the reality is if the city owns the parking garages, the city will control the destiny for what happens with those parking garages and that dirt. And I think that's an important component part to what the city gets out of the proposal that we're discussing at large. In the future, if we have less cars, we will presumably need less parking, and we would like to repurpose that, not just the structures themselves, but maybe the ground at large, maybe from a demo and a repurposing. So I think that's there. philosophically speaking, this is anecdotal, but I think it's powerful. What we've seen in our developments is what we've been able to do in places where we've built parking structures where there weren't before is draw people into the community where they want to live and have this vibrancy. They begin to park their car in this parking structure that they have, and they find out over time that they don't need all 3 cars because they're not driving as much. And maybe a couple of the folks find that they don't need any cars because they're not driving as much. And that happens not just with our residents, but it happens with our hotel guests, where over time the Uber trips increase and the rental cars decrease. And we don't have great stats on that, but we have good anecdotal evidence. And so getting cars off of the massive surface lots and into a parking garage in a community where people want to be and don't want to use their car is a step in reducing the need for cars. And it's certainly not the only one, and I think all of your other concerns are understood and well-founded, but a lot of the future-proofing that we're talking about comes through the evolution of the community that evolves because of the community infrastructure that's in place, including the appropriateness of the parking garages. I am sure that my good friend Jeff Hauptman, when I used the word magic, probably sent me a nice, nasty text when I described financial components. But the financial magic that I was really referencing is the fact that we are looking at multiple variables at the same time to talk about what our densities are. There isn't enough financial capacity in the private improvements to justify building a single deck or a single structure all at once without additional risk into the financial model. When it comes to the revenue question that you asked, and as it relates to some of the other assurances, I may turn it over to Milton and the city here. The reality is we've discussed a lot of different structures financially, a lot of different potential design options that could exist as it relates to the garages. So long as the city is constructing, operating, and financing the garages, we want to make them as robust as the city wants to see them in all of the respects that you asked about. But there's multiple variables that go into that. That's design, which we anticipate the city will weigh in on and in some cases dictate. That's the financial mechanisms to pay for it, which the city is going to work on. And it's the intersection not just with the garages, but all of the infrastructure needs.
The footnote that I would add, Councilmember Dish, when you asked about the garages not being crumbling, that goes to how they're managed. That's where an entity like a parking authority comes in, where your rates are not set politically, they're set based on business basis, that the maintenance and upkeep of the structure is not skipped or deferred. It happens when it needs to happen. That's how you ensure that the structure you get maximum use out of it. And then if the market determines at a later date it's time to transition to housing versus the parking capacity, the asset that you've built and invested in is in its most peak condition possible to make the transition that you're referring to.
Okay, so the one more question that I want to ask is, again, because this is, I think we refer to the magnitude of this project as a thing that creates fear, but it's also inspiring to be looking at a project of this magnitude. And one of the things that's inspiring is it would be a marvelous pilot for geothermal heating. It would also be really great to get this project to sign up for our sustainable energy utility because it would help get that off the ground. And I wondered if you had thought of it, if Arbor South has done an analysis of the potential cost savings to you if you were to participate in our sustainable energy utility, and if you'd be willing to work with the city to do that.
That's a great question and very timely in light of the election results from the other night. We have had multiple conversations with Missy Stoltz and are excited to explore the possibilities associated with geothermal. We've actually been down the path once already as it relates to the earliest phase of seeking some grant funds to try to bring geothermal to reality before Proposal A passed, and when that was not an option. We are excited about the possibilities that new utility brings. We have as of now, I do not believe that we have enough information to evaluate what the cost savings are, but we are anxious to get that information. We are intending to be fully engaged in discussions about what opportunities there are to participate. I think our concerns as it relates to participation are really about timing and capacity as much as anything. And we are intending to be engaged in the conversation from start to finish, and are hopeful that that capacity does come to fruition in a way that we can use. It's something that I can say unequivocally. Sustainable energy is a good thing, not just for cities and communities. It's a good thing for private developers as well, and we want our community to be sustainable for forever in all the ways possible. And if the capacity is there, and if we're able to validate that using that capacity is beneficial to the development, to the community, we're absolutely interested in using it. I think at this stage, we have a lot of work to do, and we're rolling up our sleeves to do it. And we're eager to see it become a reality.
Briggs, Ackman, and Watson.
And then the internal perspective, we are projecting the SCU not to be ready for customers, as it were, 18 to 24 months. That's what we're putting out.
Just by way of expectation setting in terms of here, this is a little longer than we're going for most of our work sessions, but it's also a project of moment, and I know there are questions in the room and outside of the room, so perhaps we can target about getting to public comment at 9:30, understanding that if people, council members, audience members, need to hit the road because of the little bit of extended time, then no shanks in your shame. Councilmember Briggs.
Thanks. There's lots to like about this project. Certainly, this is the first notable project in TC1, and so it's exciting to see something that's dense and vibrant and aiming to reinvigorate a portion of our town. So that's all good. However, I have some concerns about the basic premise upon which a lot of these asks are based, which is around the 3 parking structures. So there was a gas station which caused pollution, which now needs cleanup, and the ask of the city is to invest in 3 parking structures that are further investing in our, on auto-dominated lifestyles, right? So that those folks can go to another gas station in our community likely and further pollute our community. We know that there's many brownfields across town as well, unfortunately, from past pollution from gas stations or any other source. And so this project is also a model of what types of asks we're going to see as we further redevelop along our other TC1 corridors. And so it's setting that it's setting that model for what's coming next and what those asks are going to be for us. And so I am fully supportive of investing in this. I think the idea that the community, that the city would invest in this TC1 project is entirely reasonable, but I do find the ask problematic. So to go a little further into that, or some of you came in as Councilmember Redina and I were listening to the Energy Commission meeting, which was presenting on our 2023 greenhouse gas inventory. So if I have that data in front of me, since 2020, of course, when things we saw nice decreases, our greenhouse gases have been increasing in our community, which is the opposite direction that we're aiming to go, right? And so 2/3 of our emissions come from buildings, of which you have not mentioned that this is going to be a carbon neutral project. And then another 1/3 come from local transportation. I don't see, the fact that we would have parking on this site, the fact that we would have parking garages, all that makes sense, right? But it's what the city is investing in for this project. So, and in fact, we are back on par in terms of local transportation emissions with what it was in 2019 and 2018 and 2019. It's been pretty stable around there. So the problem is that we're not headed in the direction that we want to go. And the question is if we're going to be investing in infrastructure that's, helping us to not meet that direction. So I have some fundamental concerns around the ask. I also have some concerns around the concept of creating a parking authority. And so I think maybe these questions might be directed more towards you, Mr. Dohoney, in terms of thinking about that as a vision for the city, that we would set that up. Obviously, the DDA, I think, has done an outstanding job in terms of managing the parking that we have in our community. When times are tough, the DDA is in service to the downtown and all of those businesses in the downtown. In terms of developing a new parking authority, at least in the beginning, we would be in service to this particular development. And should we see more downturns in the economy, we have a financial stake in that, the well-being of that. Of course, we always have a financial stake in the well-being of our development, our community. But if you could just talk a little bit more about, your thinking around setting up a parking authority, and you mentioned this maybe being the first of many projects that might, we might invest in some way. So if you could just speak a little bit more to that.
I guess I'll start from the sort of general premise that if, in fact, developments that occur in other TC1 corridors mirror the magnitude of this one, I'm making the assumption that we're going to be asked in the future to participate. I can't tell you specifically we'd be asked to participate in parking, but we could. The city concluded at some point prior to my arrival that we don't manage parking well. That's why the DDA has it to begin with. The DDA, as it is structured, is not an entity that has bonding authority unto itself. A parking authority does. The DDA has zero interest. In fact, they see it as a conflict to manage the parking associated with Arbor South. So if they're not going to do it, and it has to be done, particularly if it's a city asset, what is the best entity to do it? What is the best entity to do it in a manner that ensures that the parking assets are properly cared for? That's what parking authorities do. I have had them in previous stops. I set one up in Lexington, Kentucky about 20 years ago. If we were to say there'll be no further parking asked in any of the other TC1 corridors, and you were to say if that were a certainty, would you still want to do the parking authority? I would have to think about it, but I would not be comfortable ever recommending to you that city government proper should be managing the parking asset, because we've already proven we can't do it. And if, in fact, the parking investment in this deal for the 3 decks is, in fact, of the magnitude of the number that Marty mentioned, you need an entity that has capacity to manage it. And to me, that is an authority, not city staff and not a DDA that's already said they don't want to do it. So that's where I'm coming from.
I guess just to add on to that a little bit, I think this may just maybe more commentary right now. So thank you. You know, we saw in the development of Lower Town that a parking structure was put in within that development. That's reasonable. The developments might see that as it's a better use of land for sure, to be building up rather than out in terms of parking. But that was financed by the development. And so, I continue to have some reservations that we would be headed in this direction in terms of the types of things that would make this project financially viable. So I guess the question is, what other, perhaps for the development team, what other considerations have been given towards, the levels of investment in infrastructure, infrastructure that's going to serve the community at large, infrastructure that helps you meet your sustainability goals, which hopefully are, above and beyond what are required by right.
Maybe a clarifying question about your question. Are you asking what other infrastructure needs the city might invest in as opposed to parking? Is that the...
Yeah, I'm sure that, in terms, correct. I mean, essentially, there's been an analysis to see what would make this project financially viable. I'm curious what other types of infrastructure could potentially be supported.
So we have done some analysis, and I'll say a couple things in not being an expert in the brownfield statute specifically, but having done deals with other similar statutes in other states. There are a specified number of uses for the proceeds that come from a TIF arrangement like the one that we're talking about. Most of those uses, and particularly to the extent that they are going to be paid for with tax-exempt financing from a bond standpoint, which provides a much lower capital rate and therefore much greater efficiency of proceeds, fall into categories that are parking, streets, and utilities, and some other ancillary things. But, a broad bucket of what is widely assumed to be public uses. And public uses for a private site like this don't add up to nearly the same number of dollars as the parking structures themselves. I think the statement that I made earlier is very real. We would like to not need the parking that we need in the current economic environment, and from a demand standpoint, in order to attract the residents that we want to attract and the entertainment options that we want to attract. And while we've done some analysis, and we always do feasibility analysis on what the other options are. They just pale in comparison from a need perspective, and it also, outside of paying for the parking, with it paling into comparison, it just ends up being a project that's not economically viable at this scale. And it doesn't mean that nothing could be built without parking decks, but nothing of density could be built without parking decks. And so I'd be remiss if I put percentages or real dollar figures on it tonight. I haven't researched the gap between the other infrastructure costs and the parking costs of recent, but it's a multiple times difference in what we're allowed to spend on other infrastructure needs other than parking and the available proceeds that exist for it. So there has been some feasibility analysis on it. We looked at doing the project entirely privately when we first looked at it 28 months ago now, and it wasn't feasible in part because of the parking decks, and in large part because of the parking decks. It's a substantial amount of infrastructure that needs to be built, and then once it's built, it also gets taxed. And so there's a feedback loop that happens that makes parking really a drain on private development as a result of it, because the taxable value itself ends up making it almost entirely financially infeasible for private parties to do it at scale for a development like this.
A couple of questions and comments. So one of the things that hasn't been talked about yet, I don't think in detail, is that this project is a very large assemblage of parcels, and as I understand it, includes a lot of private roads, bikeways, and walkways that create a lot of connectivity between the north and the south and the east and the west, which is awesome. But now that I've been in this body for 2 years, I have seen how older developments that have created amenities such as pathways that have eventually crumbled, and then when they do, it is difficult to get them taken care of appropriately. So I guess what I'm wondering, and this may be more of a city staff question, is with all of these benefits that are coming of connectivity, how can the city ensure that they persist throughout time like we would if they were our own infrastructure and roads?
Can you ask that again?
Sure. Basically, we have some paths in the city that are privately owned, but were created as part of a site plan to connect neighborhoods.
Okay.
They start crumbling because the city doesn't own them. The city's not able to fix them, and often the solution is that they get shut down by the private entity. I mean, we just had something like that happen this week. So I'm just wondering, as we think about how big of an assemblage this is and how much it matters that you can connect from different sides, but that the pathways are not city-owned, they're not public, how does the city guarantee or have any recourse to make sure that those remain good infrastructure over time?
The best way that I can answer your question tonight, because what you're really asking me would come down to, we would have to have a granular answer and a granular strategy when we know exactly what we're talking about and where it is. We're talking about essentially creating a new neighborhood. There's already been the establishment of a biz for that area. There's already been attention being brought from the city government entity to the area. We see it as something long-term that's going to be a tax generator for the city. So the city will have the ability to make long-term decisions about what happens with the revenue that's generated from the area. In other communities, they take that to plow back into the area itself to ensure that it stays where it needs to stay. I can't make that statement to you tonight because we're just trying to get the deal structured. I can give you a better answer in time for the maintenance of the area to make sure that it's meeting standards, code, et cetera, than I can tonight. But when you think about creating the entire neighborhood, we're going to wrap everything into what it will take to preserve the investment that's being made. We will have our role, Jennifer Hall will have her role, the private development team will have its role, and they all will have to continuously work together. Plus, you're also talking about building capacity that's going to be bringing in additional businesses, additional workers, additional amenities that will all play a role in managing the neighborhood that we're creating.
Thank you.
Okay.
The other thing is another kind of question and comment, and really just a clarification about the 30-year TIF. Does it, when you say it's a 30-year TIF, does that mean that the increment for 30 years goes to the payment of the parking decks? Was that you when you were listening?
You didn't ask him a question while you were asking me a question? That's fantastic. Can you ask me again, please? I'm sorry.
It was a TIF question, sorry.
Okay.
I want to make sure I understand what is meant by a 30-year TIF to invest in the parking garages. Does it mean that we are deferring the increment that we would get on the increase in the land value for 30 years to invest in the parking garages? Is that what that means?
Yeah, whether the environmental remediation, all eligible activities, including any infrastructure improvement, and the creation of the parking decks, whether we own or not, would be reimbursed through the 30 years of increment, yes.
Okay. I guess where I'm going with this is similar to Councilmember Briggs, just to tag on her comments. I do have, concerns with the city investing in parking garages when we have so many other city goals that we're trying to change behavior around. And it seems to me that on the one hand, we would want to make sure those parking decks are full because we need to make back the money that we're investing in it, while at the same time, we're trying to change behavior in the other direction. My other concern is that if I'm understanding it correctly, one of our goals is to put people where the transit lines are and to get the increased tax revenue to invest in better transit service. And by investing that money in the parking garages, it's not going to the AAATA. So that to me is just, that's my biggest stumbling block with investing in the parking garages. So that's it.
I've got a comment and a question first to Ms. Hall on the affordable housing portion. Embedded in your comments tonight was the fact that a lot of the affordable housing strategy the city has used over the years has included projects that had affordable housing for a fixed term that expired. Some of these terms are 30 years, and that some of those expired quite recently. And I'm looking at the county affordable housing dashboard, and they say 1,015 affordable housing units countywide have been lost from expiring agreements, and I think that might be since 2015. Or yeah, actually, maybe that's just total. But my question is, you had said that these units will be deed restricted. Are they permanently deed restricted?
Yes.
Okay, that's a great thing, and I think it can't be underestimated. I really do. So I wanted to underline it. I guess the broader comment, the Housing Commission, I think, also looking at this dashboard, has added 211 units since 2015. There are 380 planned units expected to come online in the next 3 years, but just to remind everybody, the promise, or, the aspiration of the community when we passed the affordable housing millage was to build 100 units a year, getting us to 2,000 units over the lifetime of the millage. If you do some math, we're running a little bit behind, and this 200 new units, that represents almost 50% of the things that we have in the, be a 50% increase on what's existing in the pipeline. So there's real community value there and real benefit there. Also to note on the parking, just a point about the zoning, the slide said that this was parked at just slightly over 1 space per 1,000 units. I believe the TC1 standard is just around 3 spaces per 1,000 units. Is that correct? So this is coming in a little bit under the parking maximum, or actually coming in on as 30% of the parking maximum for TC1. I think that's right. You said 1.06 per 1,000 square feet?
1,000 square feet, not units, but yes.
Sorry, I'm saying it wrong. I'm sorry,
But
I
yes,
just said the wrong thing. But
it's substantially less than the maximum.
The max
That's
is 3
correct.
per 1,000. This is coming in at 1, so about a third.
About a third,
of
that's
the
correct.
maximum.
Yes.
So, and one this is, I don't know if you can, I don't know if I'm going to phrase this rightly, but I've heard often that you don't often see full parking structures financed privately because the taxation makes it just too difficult. I guess essentially they're too valuable. They create too much taxable value for how much they generate. Someone on staff able to maybe comment on that, just the difficulty generally in financing parking structures. Yeah, I don't know. I'll just leave.
When you look at your team and they look back at you. You said the difficulty in financing a parking structure?
Parking structures of a certain size.
Well,
for a private entity as opposed to a public entity. Yeah.
The best way I can respond to you, Councilmember Watson, it is not unheard of that there are parking garages built where it equates to $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a slot. That's not an unheard of thing. It's very expensive to build them. I'm not aware of any entity that would do it with cash. So you tend to bond. And so we would, if we did it, and we haven't got to that point, we would be doing a bond issuance, and you're paying back the bond, you're servicing the bond based on the revenue and utilization of the facility. To me, that's why it is imperative that you have to ensure that both the pricing and the upkeep of the asset are managed properly to be able to do that. The development team is essentially talking about creating a mega place. We're embracing placemaking. This would be a mega place that would draw not only local activity, but regional activity. If you're driving in from around the region, the likelihood, the assumption would be you're going to park in one of those decks. So what PFM is looking at is the assumptions on will there be sufficient revenue to pay back the financing that you signed on for in the beginning. We are talking about a way to manage the decks in the interim while the city is building its own capacity. That's part of our discussion because obviously we're not ready right at the beginning. Last thing I'll say is a development project of this magnitude, anyone, well, say it this way, I don't know how anyone could say you can build it and it's zero risk. I've never seen that. You want to be aware of your risk. You want to be able to mitigate your risk. You want to be able to manage for your risk. That's what we're trying to build here. That's why I circle back to what I said earlier. The city will have a choice. Are we willing to invest and essentially bet on ourselves or not? It doesn't pencil. The deal won't pencil if the decks aren't there. It just won't.
Thank you.
Further discussion or questions? Thank you all extremely much. Thank you, staff, for working with the development team. I think what we have before us is an extremely interesting proposal for our first TC1 development. It's a development of ambition in which we would be able to, if it came to full fruition, welcome 1,500 new Ann Arborites to our community. We would be able to welcome new businesses. We'd be able to welcome new visitors. We'd be able to create it's not our operation. The team would be able to create a space for folks who already live here to meet their new friends who live at the site and to enjoy the amenities that they envision and, if passed as prologue, will realize. With respect to the concept of development, the concept of investment, I understand why the term is being used, but I think it's inapposite in many respects. The city is not putting up money for this. When I'm making an investment, I'm putting my money in on it. And as far as I've heard, and as far as I perceive, that's not what we are doing. That's not what is proposed to be done. It's proposed through the TIF that we authorize the taxpayer to use the new taxes for exclusive purposes. That we authorize the taxpayer to use those new taxes to clean up the environmental degradation, to upsize the public infrastructure that would service the site, which I assume public infrastructure would not be for this site exclusively, but would have general application, and that we allow the taxpayer to use the incremental tax increase to support the capital cost of the garages. Garages that the city would then use and receive, if the pro forma is correct, as our consultant concludes, that the city would then use to generate cash money for the city. The capital cost is decoupled from the income that we're receiving. We're not paying for the parking structures. The taxpayer is paying for the parking structures. We are taking the parking structures and taking the income from them. We are helping them using our public status, but we are not, if you will, investing our own. Our skin is not in the game. As to the scale of the parking, because that is obviously a topic of conversation, I'll just observe that 2,600 is a lot to think through, but it's also true that there are essentially 1,500 units, 1,500 spaces there now presently. And so the project as contemplated does not add 2,600 spaces. The project as contemplated adds 1,100 spaces. 1,100 spaces which will service the existing offices and the 1,500 people, new Ann Arborites, who we would expect to live there, and the 150 keys that would come to the hotel, and the existing Ann Arborites who would come visit their new friends at the site. To my, that's a modest, no. That is an efficient increase, is perhaps the best way to describe it. Anyway, there's lots to think through, and there's lots to deliberate about, and we will, and the members of the public will, and I just want to, again, thank folks who have come to the city with the vision and folks who work the city for listening to the council and understanding that we have a city that has a status quo, and the status quo has gotten us where we are, and while there's aspects of where we are that we love, there are aspects of where we are that need work, that need fixing. And TC1 is one way to accomplish that. I said 9:30, it's 9:30. Extra questions, I assume, will go to Mr. Mahoney, who will then do nothing else but answer our silly questions.
Okay.
Oh, later is what we mean. Oh, not
yeah,
now.
Sorry,
now you
my,
can sit down.
My question was simply, what is the best way for us to submit additional questions?
Oh, to me, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we now come to public comment. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one does not need to sign up in advance in this context. But speakers in all instances will have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time. Our clerk or the time clock will notify you when 30 seconds are remaining and when your time is expired. When your time is expired, please conclude your remarks and cede the floor. Is there anyone in house who would like to speak at public comment? Is there anyone online who would like to speak at public comment?
Mayor, we don't have any callers online.
Seeing no one, the public comment is closed. May I have a motion to adjourn, please? Moved by Ira Ackman. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned.